then, oh, now we're
Good afternoon, everybody. Just want to give everyone a few minutes to get in here. I see our participants are joining, so we'll just give everyone a few moments to get situated, and then we will get going. Thanks for carving out a little bit of time to spend with us this afternoon. We appreciate it. Let's give one more moment for people to join. Okay, looks like we're all squared away. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Want to welcome you to the second of two events in our Adult Town Hall series on the future of adult sports, which is being hosted by LeagueApps in conjunction with the Social Sports Industry Association. I want to thank them for their support of this Town Hall series as well. I want to do a real quick introduction, self-introduction. My name is Nate Baldwin. I am the customer success manager in charge of our adult recreation clientele, as well as what's referred to as our fund play partners, which is our sports-based youth development partners. So excited to be here today with you all to have an important conversation about the future of adult sports. If I haven't had an opportunity to meet you in person yet, a little bit of my background. I have a 20-year record in the sports industry. About 10 of those years were spent in the adult recreation industry. I was the founder and longtime operator of an organization in Denver, Colorado called Western Alternative Sports Association. When I had kids of my own, I gravitated into the dysfunction that is youth sports. And so for the last several years, I had been operating the youth sports program in Appleton, Wisconsin. During my time in Denver, we grew participation with Western Alternative Sports Association to about 10,000 annual participants. Interestingly, we were one of the founding clients of LeagueApps. I believe we were their third ever customer. So I've been able to experience LeagueApps from the very beginning, fortunately, which has been an interesting ride. When I was in Appleton, Wisconsin, running the youth sports program, we were able to grow participation in that program by about 75%. And during that time, we were recognized as a 2018 Project Play champion. And the reason I bring that up is because that's kind of what led me to re-engaging with LeagueApps. LeagueApps was named in 2019 as a fellow Project Play champion, and that's what allowed us to reconnect. And ultimately, that's what led me to sit here in front of you all today, being given a unique opportunity to support some of the work being done in our adult rec community, but also in our sports-based youth development community. So excited to be here with you all. As I mentioned, this is the second of two town hall sessions on the future of adult rec. In last week's town hall, we focused on navigating the day-to-day challenges of programming in a pandemic, particularly as it relates to the upcoming winter season. We heard some great insights about finding new ways to serve our collective organizational purpose, staying engaged with our participants, providing creative programming ideas, and dealing with the uncertainty of access to indoor space. We also talked about the need for collaboration and seeking our own sense of community with other organizers who are facing the same obstacles that we are on a day-to-day basis in a pandemic. This week, we want to transition to a conversation about the big picture. So specifically, we want to explore how these past several months have compelled us to reassess or re-examine the important role that we fill as adult recreation organizers in our communities. As we think about the important role that we fill in our communities, I think the natural question to ask is, what do our participants depend on us to provide? Do they depend on us merely for access to specific sport experiences, or is it something larger than that, such as providing a means by which our participants can find social and emotional connection or belonging? Those are big questions, but they also provide a meaningful lens by which we can examine our organizational behaviors over the past several months. What worked in fulfilling our purpose when traditional programs and sports weren't possible. Perhaps it compels us to think about what didn't work. and with a critical eye. And looking ahead, the final question would be, what have we learned about ourselves and about our participants that's going to endure once we move beyond pandemic life? So these are all topics that we're excited to explore further with our guests today, and I'm really excited to hear some of their insights and perspectives. Just a couple of real quick housekeeping items. First of all, I know we're all Zoom experts by now, having lived the Zoom lifestyle for the last 8 months. So we want this to be interactive. So use the chat function in Zoom to ask questions, chime in at any point. We are going to be offering 2 polls during the course of our conversation to give you an opportunity to provide your own feedback about things that you're thinking about with your organizations. So be sure to respond to those polls. They'll pop up automatically on your screen. We mentioned the content of the first of these town hall sessions, which looked at the specifics of the upcoming winter and things that you can do now. So we want to make sure that we share the link for that first session in case you missed it. So you can look for that link in the chat as well and access the recording of that first session. Also, before we get too far, I want to mention our next opportunity to join the community, and we're excited to announce NextUp University. So NextUp University is a really exciting thing that LeagueApps is going to be offering. A lot of times when there are learning opportunities that are in webinar format, a lot of these things can be pump up sessions, why we should be doing things. I'm excited about this one because this is really going to get into the how we do those things. We're excited to be offering 6 tracks of learning to choose from. And these is going to be learning from industry leaders, in-house specialists. There's going to be real tangible takeaways that you can then take back to your organizations in your communities to drive impact. So we're really excited to offer NextUp University December 2nd through 4th. Registration is now live. We'll include a link in the chat to registration for NextUp University. As I mentioned, there's going to be 6 tracks of learning to choose from. Some of the examples there are leadership fundamentals, marketing, growth, virtual training, and we're going to have what's called a product academy. So there's some really great tangible things to sink your teeth into at NextUp University that you can then take back to your organizations and your communities. So with that said, with the table now set, I want to make sure that we bring in our guests, and I'm excited to bring these folks on board, and I'm going to introduce each one of them and ask them to turn on their video as I do. So first of all, James Gibbons. James is the CEO of OpenSports. James works with sports organizations to give them great software. He has created some top-selling mobile apps. He's built software for organizations, including Morgan Stanley, Canadian government, and he loves playing sports. So welcome, James. Appreciate having you here. Next, I want to mention Sal Farruggia. He is the owner of LI Kick, which is Long Island's largest provider of social sports. He's also the co-founder of Game Night Social. So Game Night Social is reimagining what is possible through virtual events. They've created virtual events for birthday parties, fundraisers, corporate events, college programming, and even bachelorette parties, which sounds interesting. So welcome, Sal. Appreciate having you here. Lastly, Tarek Pertew. He's been with us before, and we're excited to have him back. He's the co-founder of NYC Footy. Tarek currently serves as the Chief Creative Officer at Uncubed, which is a platform that connects creatives to innovative companies through online learning, editorials, and events. He's also one of the original creators of NYC Footy, which is an adult soccer league in New York City that's home to 3,000 players. But more than just soccer, it's a community where thousands of players from all walks of life come together, both on and off the pitch, to enjoy the beautiful game. Before these, he launched a t-shirt company, developed a platform for higher education, as well as a referral technology company. He's also, I want to mention, a fan of Liverpool Football Club. So Tarek, thanks for joining us as well. It's great to have you back. Okay, so James, if you want to turn on your video too and rejoin us here, we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of this conversation. So first of all, I just want to kind of set the table here. You each run leading organizations in the adult rec space. These past 8 months have been all about adjusting to government regulations, pivoting in a way that best serves your community, and doing the best we can to stay relevant. So can each of you maybe just spend a minute or two kind of just telling us about how you personally or how your organizations have managed during this time? And along with that, how has your community responded to that? So Sal, how about we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely, Nate, and thanks for having me here. So in March, we had 100% capacity. We were full momentum, full steam ahead. And then the pandemic hit, and we went basically to 0 participants in the month of March, April, May, June. And we finally came back in July. Now we're coming back slowly. We're at about 70% of where I think we should be right now. And it's been a bit of a ride. We've been learning a lot. We've had to teach ourselves a bunch of new skills. And during quarantine, we had to pivot also. We couldn't run our league, so we went virtual. We tried a couple different things. Some stuck, some didn't. And I guess I'll explain to you later on what we did and how it worked out.
Excellent. Thank you. Now, James, your perspective is a little bit different in that perhaps you didn't have a specific program that you were running, but with a service that provides tools for programs. What is your perspective on that? How did you and your organization manage during this time, and how has your community of clients responded?
For sure. So I guess, well, thanks Nate for having me here. And I think we traditionally deal more with sort of the pickup side of things, which is like sort of the shorter one-off events. And we saw sort of that immediate hit initially that Sal mentioned come in March. But I think just as sort of other industries have been sort of switching things up to offer more flexibility, we've seen sort of an outpouring of supportive organizations adding pickup to the mix. And pickup for us has always been sort of a gateway drug to leagues and LeagueApps and things like that, where organizations get the bulk of their revenue. But I think in the interim, in terms of sort of players and organizers not knowing what's going to be available and how things are going to play out, pickup has been a pretty vital tool for them to keep the lights on and to be able to keep interacting with their players in different formats.
Excellent. Great thoughts. Tarek, how about you? I know the challenges in New York City were unique, especially early on. So can you share with us maybe how you've been able to manage during this time, and how has your community responded?
Yeah, and excuse the background noise, folks, if you're listening in. I've heard it's manageable, but we've got some sanding going on in the house now. Yeah, it was an extremely stressful period for us. I think that March 12th to March 16th window, I would sign off as probably the most stressful 4 days of my life. We are over communicators at NYC Footy, so we're just constantly communicating with our community about every decision we ever make and why and always. It's just kind of in the DNA of the business. But we operate our leagues. We try to operate our league. So NYC Footy is a soccer league. I think I gave you an old, or you're leveraging an old bio. The league now has 10,000 players in it. And in order to accommodate as many players as possible, we try to fit as many possible teams per league as we can. And and when you're limited on permits in New York City, you have basically a permit window that might be 10 or 12 weeks as an example. And so there's not room for lost weeks due to extreme weather or pandemic, for instance. So we try to get as many teams in as possible, which means we try to just bet that we're not going to lose a week. And if we lose a week, it sucks, because then we got to figure out how to compensate people for the lost time. And so it's stressful enough if there's like a snowfall and we have to figure out, are we going to be able to get these fields running or not? When the pandemic hit, I was in serious denial. I was like, all right, we're going to be able to take the field. We knew what was going on internationally, but we were following at the time what the government regulations and rules were, and they were allowing anyone less than 500 could play. And we're like, cool, well, not one of our gatherings is going to be more than 500. Let's go with it. But between those 4 days, and so we would communicate that with everybody because people were freaking out, right? They were just like, what's going on? Is NYC Footy going to cancel the leagues? And we're saying, no, we're going through with it. We had games on, we had opening weekend, March 7th, where we had all of our teams, they got their jerseys, everything was good. March 14th was the next week from that opening day. And then everything was different that week. I mean, everything was shut down. We were trying to communicate with everybody in real time what was happening. And every day we had a league-wide email go out with a different approach, because we were going with whatever regulations. We basically pegged our information with local and state government. Whatever they had coming out, we were just going to go along with that. We weren't going to be the smartest people in the room. We were just going to try to be predictable with our behavior. And so that was one big decision for us, is can we be predictable throughout the pandemic so people know what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. And so we effectively did that. And that week, every day, there was a new email saying we're actually doing something different. We're doing something different, doing something different. And I'm sure we'll get into it later. But then the big question, of course, was what do you do with all the money that people gave you? You know, is it refunds? Is it credits? How do you offer to people? And then as Sal was saying, once you get into June and you realize the leagues are not coming back, what else can you do from an alternative standpoint to keep the community engaged? And so I'm sure we'll get into that. But in general, the community was as confused as we were. We decided to communicate, take the lead in communication. I think we were far and away the most communicative entity in adult soccer in New York. And that at least helped other people kind of peg what their plans were against what we were coming out the gates with. Like whatever NYC Footy's saying, we're probably just going to have to do. And yeah, and then we'll get into some of the rest later. But you know, virtual stuff for us. We'll get into why, but it was tough.
You know, even though each of the three of you have very different perspectives on this and different strategies and how you've navigated this period of time, I think collectively it mirrors very closely some of the themes that emerged from our first session. And those are themes of specific traits that allowed organizations to navigate this. You know, I use success loosely because I think success all depends on your perspective of the pandemic as a whole. Success for some people could be merely survival. Success doesn't necessarily mean thriving in this instance, but for those who have found some degree of success, it's interesting that it all kind of comes back to the same concepts, which each of you talked about there, and that is innovation, flexibility, and communication. That we don't, you know, this is the first time many of our participants have gone through this, but likewise, this is the first time any of us as organizers have gone through this as well. So you don't enter into this period of time knowing exactly how to navigate it, but you do bring the traits that made you successful in the first place, and that is your ability to innovate, your ability to be flexible, and your ability to communicate coherent information to your participant bases, which I think is, I don't think that's a coincidence. I think there's a reason we've heard those themes throughout both of these sessions. And I think those are things that as organizers, we can really focus on, whether we're in a pandemic or not, that those are the traits that tend to lead to successful businesses. And so I appreciate you guys sharing that that perspective on that. I think this is a good opportunity to share our first poll question. I'm going to hopefully not cross up my helpers here, but I want to start with poll question number 2, actually. Oh, no, we're going to start with 1. Sorry, guys. We're going to start with 1. So which COVID era adjustments are you most likely to employ beyond COVID? I think we heard some comments about non-traditional programming, virtual engagement, private events. If you as an organization have employed some of these same techniques, which of these do you see are most likely to be used by your organizations once COVID is over and once we're into a period of normalcy again? So let us know your answers there. We'll share those results here shortly. Kind of changing gears a little bit. We talked about, you know, the significant impact of the pandemic on youth and both youth and adult sports. But thinking big picture, I'm curious what each of you thinks about the longer term impact, both in terms of consequences, but and also with opportunities. You know, it is a real fear in both the youth and adult sports communities that the longer athletes aren't able to participate in sports, the more likely they are to drop out, and not just drop out temporarily, drop out permanently. I know on the youth sports side of things, some reports put that as high as 29% of kids who have stopped participating during the pandemic are likely to never return. So youth sports tends to get a lot of attention, a lot of media play, a lot of focus in our country. But I think this is very relevant, as we talked about on our prep call yesterday. I think this is very relevant for the adult sports sector as well. So is this a fear for each of you? And I guess a follow-up question to that is, how are you as a company having to do things differently with that in the back of your minds, either to market or to provide outreach or to keep your athletes engaged? So I guess let's go in reverse order this time. Tarek, if you could give us some insights on that from your point of view.
Yeah, we know this is going to be a reality. So for part of the reason that we were so manic about trying to get programming back up and running, no matter what it looked like, the second we had a sniff of being able to bring people back, we did everything we could to make that happen. I don't know, for those that are running leagues in New York, you're aware that the city's parks department did not issue permits to adult organizations. Now, NYC Footy, most of our leagues in the fall are with New York City Parks. And so we were like, this is a problem. We're not going to be able to run these leagues. And so we worked with other leagues that basically took a different approach, which we completely understand, which was, you know what, we're going to sit this one out. We're going to sit fall out. Once everything's back to normal, we'll resume back to normal. We want people to associate our brand with normalcy. And I think 10 years from now, we've done the same thing. But right now, I was feeling that sense of fear that the longer our community doesn't play, each day that our community doesn't play is an increased likelihood that these players don't come back. I've seen it with my own friends. If you're just intimate with your friends, if let's say they suffer an injury, not a debilitating injury, but just injury that keeps them out for a season, sometimes they're just like, you know what, I'm hanging up my boots. I'm not going to keep playing anymore. I've got other things to do. I'm going to participate in a completely different, sport or something that'll keep me active. Now, with a pandemic, if people are out for multiple seasons, I mean, that 29%, I can see that hitting adults potentially even greater. And so we were pretty manic about getting people back out there in a way that would remind them how much they did love that. Because that's what happens, right? You forget how much you love showing up every week and playing soccer. You forget how much that was important to you. And so for us, getting people out there is important. You see that once someone takes the field, they're like, holy cow, it feels so good to be playing again. And then they know, at that moment, they're hooked again and they're going to stay. So we know there's a window, and it's an important window to get people active and out playing again. Now, one thing that we think is going to be important going forward are going to be like these one-off events and tournaments where maybe people have said, screw it, I'm not playing anymore, I'm not doing leagues, I'm not committing to that anymore. But if you can entice them with like a fun one-day event, maybe it's not all about soccer, but you can get them back. Like, you know what? All right, fine. I'll go out. We just had a tournament in Governor's Island called the Governor's Cup. We'll go. We'll join in that. It's one day, and then they get that taste again, and then you're likely to pull them back into the league. And so that would be my feedback for people that are listening is, going forward, because for us, virtual is not realistic for us because we don't like it. We only want to program things that we relate to and that we really like. We tried doing some virtual programming. It's not who we are. And there's nothing wrong with it, of course, but it's not who we are. And so we would be forcing something that wasn't authentic. So for us, we knew that a future where we were thinking about growth, where the league would grow, we needed to get people back on the field as soon as possible. And so we think a future outlet that will stick after this, that is going to be useful for us to get people back out playing, are soccer or soccer related activities that are low, it doesn't take the low bandwidth, if you will. So it's like one afternoon, one day. We've been thinking of like some real fun, unique things that are not necessarily even soccer, but new rules type soccer, just something where someone's like, that sounds fun, I'll go out. But just get people back playing, kicking again, being on a team again, and reminding themselves how important that is. And if we do that effectively, then we will be able to get back to where we were and then grow again from there, we believe. And that's what our focus is.
There's a lot there in what you just said, and I really appreciate that perspective. I mean, it to be able to give that kind of insight, though, I can tell that that takes a lot of self-reflection too. I mean, you really had to give some thought as to, what is our organization providing to our participants that they really value? And, for some organizations, that is just a sense of belonging, just a sense of community. The sport is almost irrelevant, but for your organization in particular, what I'm hearing is that the soccer element was a big piece of it too. And so one without the other didn't necessarily have the same blended effect as both of them together. And so for your specific organization, doing one without the other didn't make as much sense. And I can completely understand that in a way that perhaps I hadn't thought about before. And so I think Sal's perspective is going to be interesting though too, because you guys took a very different approach to the last 8 months. And I'm interested about how you're thinking about how you're thinking about the future, and how are you going to do things differently? How are you going to market differently? How are you going to keep your participants engaged? And what, I guess, just self-reflectively, what have you learned about your own organization during this time?
Yeah, so I guess one of our assets and also liabilities is that we're a much more social league. So we don't require a pipeline of high-level athletes to play in our leagues. We just want people that are ready to have a good time. We have a really low barrier of entry to all of our sports. So, and it's our sports really aren't about kicking home runs and scoring goals and throwing strikes. It's just about really having a good time. And people's need to congregate and recreate is a natural need. So when the pandemic eventually does subside, that need will still be there. People want to have fun. They want to be active, get involved, meet people, be engaged. So we're going to be ready when that day does come. Until then, we're keeping our people engaged. We're working within the guidelines to be able to run our sports. We're reimagining a lot of our normal programming to make it more friendly, but without taking away from the core of what we do. We've also had a big shift in what we do, and we have created a virtual company, which is called GameNight.social. In the month of March, April, May, those tough months, we had to think of a way to keep our people engaged, earn some revenue, and also be top of mind when we do return. And we went virtual. We started with a Family Feud league, and we started with Ghost Cornhole for our cornhole players. We also took our running club, which running is 5Ks. Our running club went virtual, and then we started offering virtual events like bingo, Price is Right, a pub trivia, game show showcase. And some of it was a miss, and some of it is actually still going super, super strong. And now we have a whole other virtual extension of what we do, which is called Game Night Social. And that is also really digging into people's needs to be together. So a lot of people come to us and they have the same exact problem. They want to have their birthday party, but it was ruined by coronavirus. They can't go to the wineries. They can't have more than 50 people over. They can't have more than 10 people out at a restaurant, and they come to us. Fundraisers, they can't have their fundraisers as normal. They want to go virtual with us. Corporate events, same exact thing. They have a budget for the $20,000 end of the year annual party, and that can't happen as normal. And they really don't know what to do. They need to do something. They need to have a birthday party. Colleges need to have their homecoming, need to have a virtual programming, and they really don't know what to do. So they came to us, and we're able to provide a lot of virtual options for them, which has been a lot of fun. It was a big challenge. It's something that I've never done before. I taught myself some skills. I partnered with a buddy, and we're having a great time. We've hired new staff because our current staff was really geared towards on-field operations. And now we have people that are willing and really leaning into going virtual and hosting trivia, stuff like that. And it's been a big hit. And we're really happy and really lucky that we're going in that direction now.
Yeah, so you've really leaned into the social aspect of it, the social draw to your program. And I think you mentioned yesterday that this has actually opened you up to a large untapped audience from what you were offering before, or an audience you maybe hadn't perhaps thought of as intentionally as you do now. And so that's going to be really interesting, especially as we how do you see that playing out as we get into a more of a defined sense of normalcy? Do you see it as a challenge to get, quote unquote, the old guard back while protecting this new group of participants, or how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, it really is two different groups now. Our core LA Kick players, most of them are back in their normal league, and they have some sense of normalcy. With our virtual extension, we're going from one event to another, and we're really just finding that a lot of people are having the same problems. And a year ago, there was no appetite for virtual events. It didn't seem like a feasible option. People didn't know about it, and it didn't really appeal to anyone. But now with all the problems that live events are having, and all the solutions that virtual events can check off, it's been really popular. If we do a birthday party and they invite 40 people, they're gonna have a great time. And of those 40, 4 of them are gonna have a birthday next month. And they never knew that this was possible until they attend one of our events. And then they have the same problem next month and they hit us up. Same thing for fundraisers, corporate events. You get one person in that group, they have a great time. And they were invited the first time, and then next month they call us up to host their virtual event. So we really do have 2 different fronts now. Our on-field operations, we're trying to operate with some semblance of normalcy within the guidelines, and our virtual is really a different set now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. James, I'm looking forward to hearing your perspective on this too, because I think your technology focuses on offering something that really helped bridge the gap during a difficult time, and that is a focus on pickup play or informal play, I guess you'd say. So I guess in what ways do you think that this has helped keep athletes or participants engaged? And do you think it was more, we've heard a couple of different blends of this from Tarek and from Sal. So I guess I'm interested in your point of view. Has that gravitation towards open play been more about the sport, or has it been more about an opportunity to come together socially, in your opinion?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's definitely on the social side. I mean, people just being confined to their homes and apartments. It's so different. And this sort of opportunity to get out is something that people are so thankful for, just to see other bodies. And I think sort of people may be hesitant to committing to a league, sort of not knowing right off the top what it's going to be like, what are the rules and regulations in terms of guidelines around sort of keeping people safe. But the moment you can give people sort of a taste of what it is like to be back on the field, all of a sudden that magic is restored, and then they'll be signing up for leagues and other things as they would in the past. But it helps them sort of get off the couch and get off Zoom and like back into the physical world. And I think they're also just sort of different formats to setting up pickups that we're seeing, where it's sort of like a hybrid model, whereby you've got sort of say 20 or 25 people signing up to a soccer event for say 3 sessions, and you sort of have those people playing on different teams against each other. So it's a relatively small pool of people that you're exposed to or that you're playing with, but there still is sort of the competitive element of sort of different configurations and keeping score like you would in a league.
Yeah, it's that pod concept. And we've seen that a lot on the youth sports side. And to be brutally honest, that's the way a lot of programs have managed to survive this time, was by limiting those group sizes, limiting the degree of contact tracing that would be necessary if you were to have a case, and just generally trying to make it more feasible to come together, but in a setting that has, provides inherently more safety and more comfort in actually participating. So it's interesting to see that trend is also applied in some way on the adult end of things. I guess that shouldn't be a surprise, but it's interesting to see that actually applied on the field. I want to kind of transition into, I guess, what we would call new opportunities. And so to kind of lead into that, I want to bring up the results of that first question we asked, because I think it ties nicely. So the question was, which COVID era adjustments do you think are most likely to last beyond COVID? And it's interesting to see that the largest response was virtual engagement. So it sounds like collectively as a group here, we think that one has some staying power. Second highest response, what we just talked about, pods, small group play, private events. So that's interesting. Between virtual engagement and small groups, that's about 75% of the responses. So that's very interesting to hear those outside perspectives on that. So looking at new opportunities then with that lens, we've heard from all of you about pivoting, leaning into new areas of business. I guess I'll ask the same question we just asked the audience. What do you think is going to stick that you've tried over the last few months? And I guess to kind of expand on that, I guess instead of the actual programs themselves, because you've each talked about that at some length, I'm thinking more about this in the perspective of, how can you leverage some of the new collaborations and new relationships that you've embarked on during that time? And what do you see any of those enduring beyond this period of time to help, ensure a more sustainable future of play? I know facilities, Tarek, that's one you talked about. The collaborations that have allowed virtual events, Sal, that's one you've talked about. So I'd be interested in getting your perspectives on that. How have these new relationships empowered you, and do you see them sustaining into the future? And just generally, what do you see sticking that what solutions do you see sticking into the future here? So Sal, how about we start with you on that one?
Yeah, sure. So I'm based on Long Island, and we are approaching our winter months where we will need to go indoors for most of our activities. And that's going to be a challenge because we can't run some leagues at all. We can't run other leagues at full capacity, and other leagues that we do run need to be under different guidelines and regulations. So it is going to be difficult. And if the numbers of corona cases go the wrong direction and we get shut down, that's going to be a major challenge for all sports leagues and all events where human connection is the main focus of it. So we do have virtual options, and that's something that we're going to lean into. One advantage we have with the winter is that people won't have the same opportunities to go outside and recreate, so they will be stuck inside. The sun is going down, and then the normal activities that, like if they want to go for a hike, those things aren't going to be available to them. They can't go to the movies. They going out to the bar is just not the same experience. So their appetite for virtual is going to come back around in the winter months. So we will be running trivia leagues, and I do think that our virtual options are going to become more in demand as people don't have as many other opportunities to do outside activities. So yeah, it's what we're going to be doing in the winter. And I like doing it. It's going to be a lot of fun for me. And it won't be as big a hit or a big revenue driver as our normal leagues, but it will keep the wheel spinning. It will keep people engaged, and it will keep our competition boxed out.
Tarek, yesterday you mentioned some collaborations locally that have allowed you to secure some absolutely needed space when space has been scarce. And I believe you mentioned it briefly on this call today too, but do you see a future for those collaborations? Do you see them leading to a place that's more sustainable long-term than perhaps maybe it's been in the past? Or how do you see some of those efforts, those collaborations serving you as you move forward?
Yeah, great question. Because these collaborations were certainly out of need and desperation in many cases. Luckily, we have built good relationships with these leagues. That's not an easy thing to do, and certainly in the city, it's an extremely competitive landscape. If you're on a field, then that means the other league's not on the field. But we built some good relationships, and we leaned on those during this period. And similar to Sal, you take a haircut a bit on maybe the type of revenue you would make outside of a collaboration, but to keep the wheels moving, as he said, to get your community feeling like, the lights are on, you do it. And I've already got conversations happening now about going into winter with existing collaborations. We are expecting the city to return to give permits to adults this winter. We're expecting that, which will be nice. But again, if there is a spike, the public parks will be the first ones that shut down, not the private facilities. So yeah, we're motivated to keep those collaborations going. And then in as much as we can do it beyond COVID, that would effectively give us more, that would give us room to grow so long as those leagues are open to that type of collaboration. And in New York, some of these leagues, they've been running for like 30 years. And to be honest, I think some, they might just be getting a little tired, and they are welcoming collaborations, to be quite honest, because it is an exhausting enterprise. And if you've got kids and they're going to college and, you're just running around dealing with location-based issues, that gets exhausting over time. And so I think collaborations are appealing. And so I do think that might happen. We're very collaborative, so we will take advantage of that. In terms of virtual, I'd mentioned that we weren't super into it. And I think it's because in our DNA, I, as you had mentioned, the profile, I run a technology company. I'm like glued to this screen nonstop. So it's tough for me to be heavily motivated for like more virtual anything, to be quite honest. But I will always think about the league first. And if we feel there are opportunities virtually, and that could mean like FIFA tournaments, which we tested during the pandemic, and that went really well. Again, no money, but the community reacted well. We thought about collaborating to do like virtual, like actually education, like meeting and doing interviews with, professional soccer players and just getting the community to develop online. But we think that if we do go that route, it won't be instead of offline, it will be in addition to. And we do think we'll probably go in that route because, as Sal said, I mean, the demand for virtual will go up for sure. So we probably need some sort of virtual offering if we're going to be a relevant player, going forward.
I think you just touched on something pretty interesting. I was just having that conversation earlier today with somebody that, even if we're not necessarily going to leverage some of the techniques that we've had to learn over the last 8 months specifically to serve our programs, they will at a bare minimum complement the things we were doing. They'll increase our efficiency. They'll enhance, our ability to train staff or train players. They'll enhance our ability to do the things we were already doing. So I think that last comment you made was really interesting, that even if it's not something we're going to intentionally lean into moving forward, we've learned a lot about our own efficiency, or maybe I should say inefficiency, and how we maybe incorporate some of the things we've had to learn on the fly over the last several months. Will benefit us. Go ahead.
One thing that might be interesting for folks listening, and it's interesting for us, and I don't have experience to give you great advice on it, but is that with the movement to remote work, there might be a slew of new types of opportunities in adult sport, which could mean midday leagues as an example, right? Because traditionally adult leagues have to play after 6 p.m. effectively. Anything before that, you're not playing. And those fields are always totally underutilized in Manhattan, during work hours. And as remote work hits, and as so long as there's still density in the city, that could open up midweek, midday leagues actually for adults. Now, we've not explored that, but that is something that we might experiment, which is like lunchtime leagues, if you will. Second is the possibility of parents and children doing some sort of soccer related activity together, because parents' schedules are more flexible, right? So we did launch something called Footy Family Fitness. We've been doing something called Footy Fitness for a while, where once a week at a field, people get together and they do soccer skills and fitness training. So we're exploring the possibility. We've launched it, but we haven't really marketed it yet. Family fitness, where you can come with your child and do, fitness and soccer skills together, assuming that the schedules are hopefully opening up for parents. So we're going to keep a close eye on that part of opportunity going forward, which is that the actual window where people can play might shift drastically, and parents might actually be interested in doing more activities with their children.
Great insights. James, I don't want to slide past this question without asking you this, because I think you have an opportunity to kind of tie this in from the perspective of providing tools that organizations and teams can use. Now, they've used it over these last several months to kind of bridge that gap. So looking forward, what have you seen has been extremely valuable to the organizations and teams that you serve? And do you see those things, do you see organizations and teams latching onto that long term and kind of carrying it into whatever future we're about to embark into?
For sure. Yeah, I think definitely in terms of like as a marketing tool long term, pickup and these pods aren't going to go away. It is just such an easy way. If you have like an Instagram promotion where you're giving a discount on a $10 pickup game, it becomes $5 or whatever it is. It's just such low hanging fruit that, and to Tarek's point about people being able to play at any time, like we see with Chicago Fire that they have morning games at like 7 a.m. They have lunchtime games at noon. And with sort of this, and this was like pre-pandemic, but now sort of with people's flexibility in terms of being able to take a break whenever almost during the day. It's so nice to sort of get out and enjoy a bright sunny day to just take a break. So I think that's definitely a trend that's worth exploring for lots of organizations, and that we'll continue to see good results from. I think organizationally, we've been trying to get ready for esports come the winter, given that, assuming there's a full shutdown for a lot of organizations, I think, depending on what sports you're running, but if it's sort of the soccers or the basketballs, there's an easier tie-in compared to, say, you're a volleyball group. But that said, I think it's just a great touch point for organizations, and they're definitely sort of tools to running them that I think can make, sort of given how fast things can change in terms of games and formats and whatnot. So I think I'm excited to sort of have those released in the coming weeks and months.
Excellent, thank you. I want to go ahead and ask our second poll question here, because I think this is a good time for it. You'll see it pop up on your screen here shortly. And that is, what do you think is the most pressing long-term challenge will be for the adult sports industry? Is it going to be playing space access, something we've talked about quite a bit on this call and the previous one? I think health screens and tracing is something we haven't talked about a lot on this call, but I think that's in the back of everyone's mind. Do we think that's going to be with us long-term? Outreach and participation, trying to bridge the non-participation gap that we might see. Or is it more concrete? Is it financial concerns and survival? So give us your thoughts on that. We'll circle back to these results here in a minute. But the last question I want to focus on before allowing a few minutes at the end for some questions from our group here is kind of more on the nature of personal leadership. So just reflecting on your own roles as leaders of your organizations, but also leaders within the industry. It's so important to share tactical ideas and thoughts so we can all take back to our organizations, but it's also important to think about, what we've learned from a leadership perspective and what we've learned about things like communication and community and just the various aspects of running a business. So I've got a couple questions that I'd like you each to expand on for just a moment, if you could. But the first one is, what did you each learn, or are you continuing to learn during this crisis about yourself as a leader and about yourself as a leader within this industry? But then secondly, when it comes to strategy and rethinking your purpose, the saying is, don't waste a crisis. This has challenged all of us to try to do that. So how can you personally kind of keep that ability, keep centered on that, to think outside of the box, think bigger, and experiment and pivot even after things return to normal? So James, I've had you go last on that last one, so why don't I have you go first on this one? So questions are, again, what did you learn about yourself from a leadership perspective? And then what are you going to carry with you moving forward once things do return to normal so that complacency doesn't set in?
Sure. I think sort of being available to the people we work with is something that has, we've sort of, I think traditionally you'd sort of go and meet your clients, and with you sort of zigzagging across the country, we go to conferences and things like that. But now the fact that it's so normal to just be on a Zoom call, figuring out sort of the problems that people have and sort of letting them be the ones who guide your work versus sort of in a whiteboard room trying to come up with the solutions. So whether sort of it's on the health and safety side in terms of like defining product and figuring out what organizations need and how they're using it, I think we've had a lot more time to adjust and to learn about how things could be better, and hopefully to leverage that. And I hope that doesn't change. And I think just thinking of sort of us as an industry, and this is perhaps too political, but I think given that we are a few days away from a fairly major election, and regardless as to who we want to win, I think we have sort of a captive audience with the SSIA of millions of Americans that can vote. And to the extent that we've engaged people, whether it's in cooking classes or sports, and if you think of sort of teams sort of having sort of a fighting attitude but are able to go and drink together afterwards, I think to the extent as an industry we can help get people out to vote, it would definitely be a net positive in the very short term.
Oh, you went there. You went to the election. You're a brave man. You're a brave man.
Unfortunately, but yeah.
No, I think those are
Just a thought.
great insights, and it gets back to the whole spirit of this industry as a whole, which is a spirit of inclusion, a spirit of belonging, a spirit of unified participation, which I think it's important we don't lose sight of that too. Sal, how about your perspective, just as you self-reflect? You know, what have you learned about yourself as a leader of your organization, but also within the industry? And, you know, how has that, what are you going to carry with you moving forward? What have you learned about yourself that will serve you once things do return to normal?
Yeah, absolutely. So the quarantine has been a bit like the wild, wild west, with rules, roles, responsibilities, all in upheaval. And it's hard to predict the future. No one really knows what's going on. And the guidelines that you get are constantly changing also. So it's a tough environment to operate in, but I think you just got to go out there and you got to do it. And it may not be perfect, but you got to do something. And if you got to put the team on your back, you just got to go for it. It's hard to just say to somebody else, why don't you, we've never done virtual before, but why don't you just go start a virtual thing for us? Really, that's a big ask. But if you're the first one and you lean into it, then you can put down some groundwork, enlist help of others, take on smaller jobs, aiding you. You could get it out there, and you just got to put something forward. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I don't think that your players are expecting things to be perfect now. So if you have a live kickball league and you only have 4 teams, or you have to start a week late, maybe one team is short players, so they're using all subs. I think people, they want to be active, they want to be involved, they want to be engaged, and these leagues that the adult sports offer, virtually, in person, are a great opportunity for people to explore and get out there and do some things. And it doesn't have to be perfect. They just want to go out there and do it. So as a leader, I would just say get out there and do it.
Doesn't get any simpler than that. I love that. All right, Tarek, bring us home. Self-reflection, you know, what has been some of the most surprising things you've learned about yourself as a leader, and how is that going to help you endure once things return to normal?
Sal really should have brought us home with that one, to be honest. But I'll tell you what I think I learned here. I think I think punching through tough times is so much easier when you really do love what you're doing. And you know, I have this benefit of having like a technology company and a soccer league in my life, and which is to say I have the benefit of something I like and something I love. You know, there's a difference there. And when you love something, you know, you will do anything really to make sure that the people that you're affecting are happy, and that you are being, you know, just an honest human being about it all. I mean, for us, communication, I mean, one of the biggest pieces of feedback we get, and I should, you know, I'll take your question about being a leader, that I'll take of what I think I do well as a leader is I tell everybody always what's going on about everything. I take the approach that if you tell everybody what's going on, they can't complain to you about certain things. I told you in advance why we're doing certain things. I explained to you in detail why we're doing certain things. I explained to you what your options are. I want you to always know what's going on in my head, so you can't make assumptions about the decisions we're making. And that's always been our approach, and it was more prominent now than ever because of the pandemic. And the amount of people, which is to say maybe 10 people, but that's a lot when they come up to you and tell you this, that said, nobody communicated to us nearly as much as NYC Footy. And in some cases, some leagues never even sent a single email out. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate that. And it was very easy for us to keep our money in NYC Footy because we knew exactly what we were going to get back out of it. And that taught me a lot, really, about, you know, just be honest with your community. And if you let them know you're about to go through a difficult time and you're making these decisions to help your own survival, most people, like, I think we gave like 12 refunds of all thousands of players because everybody understood. They trusted us. They believed that we were going to do the right thing by them because we overly communicate constantly. But that comes very naturally to me, and it comes very naturally to me with something that I also love doing all the time. And again, if you love it, like answering 50 customer service emails every day is not a chore at all. To be quite honest, it's very enjoyable when you really like spending time there. So I don't know, if I take it home, I'd say, if you're not doing something that you really love to do, I think all this is going to be a shitload harder. Excuse my French. I think if you really enjoy what you're doing, you'll figure out ways of punching through, creating new business, anything that'll keep your community just relying on you for the things that bring them together and make them happy. And I guess that's it.
Well, you're talking specifically about passion, and I think passion is at the very heart of every successful entrepreneurial venture. If you're not getting into entrepreneurship without passion for what you're doing, it's bound to fail. And
or it's going to be a lot of ongoing feeling of brute force, like you're just constantly swimming upstream because you don't love it, but you're doing just the motions. But when you love it, it's just very different.
Each of you have talked about that in your own way, and I think that's a critical theme to take away from this, and that is to understand whether this is your passion in action in the work that you're doing. And I think that's a really important takeaway. Let's see that last poll question results here, and then I'd like to open it up for some questions here before we wrap it up. So the question was, what do you think the most pressing long-term challenge would be for the adult sports industry? And outreach and participation came away as number 1. Access to playing spaces, number 2. I don't think I'm necessarily surprised by that. I don't know if anyone else on our call is necessarily surprised by that. But I think the good news there, just as is my own editorial, I think the outreach and participation one is something that's within our control. I think that's something we've talked about extensively during both this session and our first session. And if that's our biggest challenge, then I'm very optimistic about where we're heading as an industry and as individual organizations within that industry. And I think that's ultimately what comes back to the point that was just made earlier, that that's where passion comes into play. That's where determination and perseverance come into play. So great thoughts. Let's take these last 4 minutes to open up the floor. If you have a question for one of our panelists, please put it in the chat. And if not, I will start to wrap things up. So I'm going to provide an awkward pause here and allow you a moment to type in any questions you might have. We had one question about what is the name of James' company, and I see that was provided. So that's provided in the chat. If anyone wants more information, opensports.net. So thank you for that one. Christine asks, do any of you have ideas for holiday events? Anyone want to expand on that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. We will be offering corporate holiday party packages. And again, that's just because corporate events usually have their annual party. They can't do it this year. So yeah, we'll be offering virtual holiday events.
Yeah, I don't have much to contribute there, unfortunately, but it's a really good question because that's such an important time for people to feel a sense of community or during holidays. And so it's probably just something we need to think deeply about. We'll often do like a holiday tournament, like a Thanksgiving Day tournament, because no one's playing in leagues, and we'll just do something that'll just get people out there. We'll probably do that this year again. And Sal made a good point earlier where it's like, just try something. Who cares if it's like not the biggest hit? Just try it. Just try it. And if there's a little signal there, then you can expand on it. So try something small on holidays.
Boy, and now is the time to do that, isn't it? I mean, this is the time to experiment and innovate and try anything that you think might work. I mean, if not now, then when? So yeah, that's an interesting thought as well. I haven't seen any more questions come in. I'll give it just a couple more seconds and then I'll wrap up. But in the meantime, I just want to thank again Social Sports Industry Association. They've been a critical partner in helping LeagueApps put together these adult rec town halls, which has been a real pleasure to be able to host these conversations. I think the conversations have been invaluable. The perspectives of the guests, all the guests we've had over the course of these 2 weeks, has been phenomenal, and I hope everyone takes away some great insight and actionable ideas for their own organizations. Of course, anyone is welcome to reach out to us here at LeagueApps at any time. We're happy to have further conversations with you. Last point or last reminder I'll make is don't forget LeagueApps University, which is coming up December 2nd through 4th. And as I mentioned earlier, registration is open now. We will have a replay of this session available via our social media channels here within the next day or two. So keep an eye on LeagueApps on social media for those links. You'll see a link to LeagueApps or NextUp University in the chat there. And it was a real pleasure to have our guests, Tarek, Sal, James. Appreciate your insights. Thanks so much for joining us. And to everyone else who joined us, thank you for joining and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Nate.
See ya.
Thanks all.